He ruled the underworld, but every night he checked under the bed. A mafia boss feared by an entire city, yet he can't sleep without the lights on. And then she appeared. The only girl who wasn't afraid of him. Also the only one who knew what he feared. New series, Mafia Boss Who Feared Ghosts, where power meets fear and love begins in the dark. Secrets, haunting, and a heart that never learned to love. If you love emotional, cinematic stories of fate and power, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share to support the channel. Because sometimes the most dangerous man in the city is just a man afraid of the dark. And the story begins. The night I met Dante Moretti, the southern edge of the city was covered in a thin rain that looked more like smoke than water. It wasn't heavy enough to send people running, but it lingered long enough to turn every shop window into a warped mirror. I was locking the front door of my aunt's antique store when I heard the sharp screech of brakes at the mouth of the alley. When I looked up, I saw 3 black SUVs stopping in front of the abandoned townhouse across from my shop. The one neighborhood kids called the Widow House because they swore a woman in white stood behind the second-floor curtain every night at 3 in the morning. The first man who stepped out of the lead vehicle was tall enough to make the umbrella above him seem small. He wore a black suit that fit like armor, his dark hair slicked back, his expression carved from something colder than marble. Even before anyone said his name, I knew who he was. Men like Dante Moretti didn't need introductions. Power moved ahead of them. Fear followed behind. The bodyguards around him lowered their eyes when he passed, and that alone told me he was used to being obeyed. Then something happened that made the back of my neck turn cold. The moment Dante reached the rusted iron gate of the abandoned house, he stopped. Not the cautious kind of stop. Not the kind men make when they hear danger and prepare for it. This was different. His whole body locked, as if he had heard a voice only he could hear. I followed his gaze to the dark second-floor window. There was someone standing there. A woman's outline. Slender. Motionless. Long hair hanging past her shoulders. Her head tilted ever so slightly, as if she were studying us from the other side of the glass. I wasn't surprised. I had gotten used to her over the last 3 months, ever since my aunt passed away, and I moved into the room above the antique shop. But Dante's reaction was different. His hand tightened around the silver-headed cane he carried, and I could see the tension jump in his jaw. One of his men leaned close and asked if he wanted them to check the house. Dante snapped at him so sharply the others immediately fell silent. Then he turned, slowly, and for the first time in my life, I saw a man who looked like he ruled an empire of violence with the eyes of a boy trapped in the dark. "You," he said, pointing straight at me. "You live here?" I nodded, still holding my keys. Across the street, his eyes narrowed. "Do you know who is in that house?" The question sounded simple, but the way he asked it was not. It wasn't suspicion. It was dread. The kind of dread that comes from hoping the answer will be a lie. I should have laughed it off. I should have said there was no one there and gone inside like any sane woman would. But exhaustion makes people honest, and honesty has always been my worst habit. "Yes," I said. "There's a woman who stands at that window almost every night." One of the guards gave an uneasy laugh, but it died the second Dante looked at him. The wind shifted, carrying with it the smell of wet stone and something sweeter underneath. Lilies. Old lilies. The kind of scent that lingered in funeral homes long after everyone had gone. Dante looked back at the window. The figure was gone, but instead of relief, all color drained from his face. "What's your name?" he asked. "Clara." He stepped closer, rain darkening the shoulders of his coat. "Clara, you're coming inside that house with me." I almost laughed, because the request sounded insane even coming from a man like him. But no one around him smiled. "No," I said. "I don't work for strangers." "I'm not a stranger," he replied. "Everyone in the city knows who I am." "That's exactly why I'm saying no." I expected anger. Men like Dante Moretti were not used to being refused. Instead, he stared at me with something far more unsettling than rage. Desperation. Then he came one step closer, enough for me to catch the scent of leather, cedar, and something faintly burnt, like old incense. "I'll pay you 10 times what you make in the shop in a year," he said quietly. You just have to tell me one thing. I cross my arms.
What? His voice lowered.
Is the woman from the window standing behind me now? The question took the humor out of everything. I stopped breathing for a second, because at that exact moment, a cold draft brushed the back of my neck like invisible fingers. And in the reflection of my shop window, behind Dante Moretti's rigid shoulders, stood a woman with wet black hair and a white dress clinging to her body, leaning close enough to whisper something into the ear of the most feared mafia boss in the city. I don't know what made me agree to go inside the widow house with Dante Moretti that night. Maybe it was the look in his eyes, the terrible strain of a man who had outrun something for years only to realize it had been waiting at the finish line. Or maybe it was because I had grown up with too many half-whispered warnings from my grandmother to laugh at things that walked without leaving footprints. The gate groaned when one of his guards pushed it open. That sound alone felt wrong, thin and metallic, like a rusted scream waking up. The house had belonged to a wealthy family decades ago, but after the fire that killed the bride upstairs, no owner had stayed longer than a month. Every tenant left in the middle of the night. Some abandoned furniture. Some left dishes half-washed. One left a child's birthday cake untouched on the kitchen table, frosting hardened like old plaster. Dante told me he bought the house that morning. You bought a haunted house? I asked as we climbed the porch steps. I bought a property, he answered. I discovered the haunting later. The front door opened too easily. That bothered me more than if it had been stuck. Inside, the air was cold in a way that had nothing to do with weather.
It was.
The kind of cold that felt inhabited. The kind that touched the back of your teeth. One of the guards turned on his flashlight and the beam moved over peeling wallpaper, old portraits filmed with dust, a chandelier draped in gray webbing, and a staircase curved like the spine of a dead animal. The house was silent, but not empty. I knew the difference. The moment I crossed the threshold, every small hair on my arms rose at once. One of the younger bodyguards, a broad-shouldered man named Marco, tried to joke that ghosts only haunted poor people because rich dead women had better things to do. No one laughed. Halfway across the front hall, he suddenly spun around and demanded to know who had touched his neck. Nobody had been close enough. Dante snapped at him to keep moving. His voice echoed upward, then died, as if something above had swallowed it. A second later, we heard it. A soft clicking sound from the second floor. Then another, like fingernails dragging along the wooden railing. All of us looked up. At the far end of the upstairs hall, something pale moved past the darkness. Marco cursed under his breath. Another guard dropped his light, and the beam rolled across the floorboards, spinning wildly before it settled against the bottom of the stairs. I looked at Dante. His face had gone so still it was almost unnatural. Fear didn't make him weak. It made him brittle. You've seen her before, I said quietly. He didn't answer at first. Then, without taking his eyes off the staircase, he said, since I was 11. That changed the air in my lungs. We went upstairs. Every step groaned under our weight, but beneath the wood and dust, another smell began to rise.
Perfume.
Old-fashioned and sweet. Funeral flowers. Damp silk. The room at the end of the corridor stood half open. The door moved slightly, though no breeze touched us. Dante stopped. Not politely. Not thoughtfully. He stopped like a man reaching the edge of a cliff in total darkness. Don't, he said. His voice had dropped so low, it was almost a whisper. Don't open it. Before anyone could obey, laughter spilled from the room. It wasn't loud. That was what made it worse. A woman's laugh, thin and intimate, like a stranger sharing a secret in the dark. Marco swore and kicked the door open. The room was empty. A scorched iron bed frame leaned against the wall. A cracked mirror stood in the corner. The wallpaper was blackened near the ceiling, and in the middle of the floor there was a dark, wet stain, as if someone had just stood there in dripping clothes. See, Marco said too quickly. Nothing. Then the mirror made a small sound. A click. We all turned. In the reflection, every one of us stood there. Every one of us except Dante. Where he should have been was a tall blot of shadow, and behind that shadow, pressed close to the glass, was a woman's face.
White.
Water-dark hair. Lips moving. I couldn't hear a word. Dante could. I knew because he stumbled back so hard he hit my shoulder, and the silver-headed cane dropped from his hand with a crack. "Out!" he shouted, and for the first time his voice broke. "All of you, out now." Panic moved through the men faster than discipline. In the crush toward the door, Marco froze. Completely froze. He stared into the far corner near the burned wardrobe and made a sound I have never forgotten, a short animal scream that cut through my ribs like ice. When we dragged him downstairs, his skin was gray and slick with sweat. He kept whispering the same sentence over and over. She said, "He owes her a life." She said he owes her a life. Dante refused to go back inside after that. He put me in his car with the same urgency men use to move evidence or survivors. Rain hammered the roof. The windows fogged. In the enclosed dark of leather and silence, the most feared man in the city sat across from me and looked 10 years younger and infinitely more haunted. "If I told you," he said softly, "that she's been following me for 19 years, would you believe me?" The answer should have been no. I should have told Dante to find a priest, a psychiatrist, or a grave, and leave me out of it. Instead, I sat in the dim enclosure of his armored car with rain drumming overhead and watched a man the city called untouchable struggle to steady his own breathing. That was the thing about fear. It was never democratic. A bullet could kill anyone.
Auguste chose.
Dante finally looked at me and began to speak. "When I was 11, I lived in Sicily with my mother," he said. "My father spent most of his time in America. There was a locked room upstairs in our house. My mother told me never to enter it." His voice was calm, but only the kind of calm men use while holding something broken together with both hands. "One night I heard her crying in there. I opened the door. Outside, thunder rolled over the roof like furniture dragging across a ceiling. She was kneeling in front of a little altar," he continued. "There was a photograph of a woman I didn't know. Wet hair. White dress. My mother turned around and looked at me as if I had stepped into a church with blood on my shoes. She said, 'If you ever see her, don't answer. No matter how she calls your name, don't answer.' A shiver crawled up my back. The windows fogged more deeply, as if someone outside the car had exhaled onto them. 3 days later, my mother drowned in her bathtub," Dante said. "Everyone called it an accident. I knew it wasn't. Because the night before she died, I saw the same woman at the end of our hallway. Her hair was wet. The whole house smelled like lilies. She whispered my name, and I answered." He didn't blink when he said it, which somehow made it worse. "After that," he said, "she kept appearing. At first only in mirrors, then outside windows, then beside my bed. Whenever I stayed in one place too long, she found me. Whenever I turned off the lights, I heard breathing that wasn't mine." "What did she want?" I asked. Dante's mouth tightened. "At first, I thought she wanted me dead. Then I realized she wanted me awake." He leaned back, exhausted. "I tried priests. I tried old women in Palermo who burned rosemary and whispered over salt. I tried medication, confession, silence, whiskey, God. Nothing made her leave. And the house tonight? I bought it because I was tired," he admitted. "I thought maybe if I walked straight into one of the places she chose, I could force the truth out of whatever this is. I was wrong." He rubbed a hand over his face, and for a second, the mask slipped. He looked hollow. Not evil.
Hollow.
Like fear had eaten rooms out of him over the years. "She spoke more clearly tonight than ever before," he said. "What did she say?" "She said, 'You finally built me a home.'" My fingers tightened around my coat. "There are things you learn when old women raise you on warnings and saints. Never open a door after midnight if no one calls your name twice. Never invite grief into your house by speaking to shadows. Never let the dead believe they belong in your bed." "Did you ever invite her in?" I asked. Dante met my eyes.
"No.
But I think she's waiting for me to." The car slowed beneath the gates of his estate, a black stone fortress wrapped in iron and cameras and old money. The place looked impossible to breach. That meant nothing. The dead were not impressed by security. He turned to me before the driver opened the door. Stay tonight. I almost laughed. Absolutely not. You live across from a haunted house, he said. And you saw her in the reflection. You know this is real. Knowing something is real doesn't mean I want to sleep next to it. I'm not asking you to sleep next to me. He paused, and for the first time since I'd met him, he looked almost embarrassed. Just don't let me be alone in the room. That should have been enough to make me get out and run. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. There was one new message from a number with no name, no caller ID, nothing. Just a line of text. Don't let him sleep alone. Tonight, she will stand on the left side of the bed. Every drop of blood in my body went cold. Dante watched my face change before I could hide it. You got something, he said. I looked up. He knew. Maybe not the words, but the feeling. She knows my number, I whispered. Dante's expression darkened, not with surprise, but recognition. Outside, the estate gates closed behind us with a sound like iron teeth. Then it's worse than I thought, he said, because now she wants an audience. Dante's estate was all sharp shadows, expensive stone, and the kind of silence that belonged to houses where people obeyed without being asked twice. Chandeliers burned low. Marble reflected us in broken strips of gold. Portraits of dead men lined the walls, each of them carrying the same hard mouth Dante wore when he was angry and the same eyes when he wasn't. His staff avoided looking at him directly. That alone told me they knew something was wrong. He offered me a guest suite. I refused. If she texted me, I said, then whatever's happening is already inside the perimeter. Dante studied me for a second, then nodded once and led me upstairs. His bedroom sat at the end of the third-floor corridor. Too large, too elegant, too carefully stripped of anything reflective. There were no mirrors, not one. The only glass in the room was the long window overlooking the back garden, where rain pressed in silver lines against the darkness. There was a crucifix above the headboard, a pistol beneath the pillow, a rosary coiled on the bedside table, and 3 lamps already turned on. You do this every night? I asked. Yes. His answer was flat.
No mirrors. No darkness.
No staying asleep too long. He said it like a maintenance routine for a failing machine. We sat on opposite sides of the room, neither pretending to relax. I told his guards to stay downstairs and keep the corridor empty. Too many frightened men in one place could turn a haunting into a stampede. Midnight passed. Then 1. The rain grew harder, tapping the window in irregular bursts that sounded almost like fingers. Dante did not drink. He did not pace. He just sat there in his shirt sleeves, back straight, hand resting too close to the gun. At 1:17 the lights flickered once. At 1:23 I heard footsteps in the corridor.
Slow.
Measured. The sound of high heels tapping wood. Not hurried. Not angry. Just patient. Dante's head lifted sharply. Mine did too. The steps stopped outside the bedroom door. The silence afterward was worse than the sound. It had shape.
Wait. Attention.
Then came the knock. 3 soft taps. Polite. Almost gentle. Dante stood. Don't open it, I whispered. He nodded without taking his eyes off the door. Another 3 knocks. Harder this time. Then harder still until the frame shuddered and the hinges muttered. The gun was in his hand. Before I saw him move. Then, as suddenly as it started, the pounding stopped. In the silence that followed, something breathed beneath the bed. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't plumbing. It was wet and slow and close enough to make the floorboards feel alive. Neither of us moved. My eyes dropped to the black space beneath the frame. I saw nothing at first. Then a strand of wet black hair slid out across the floor. Another followed. Then more. Long, tangled. Shining in the low light as if fresh from a river. Dante took 1 step back and hit the writing desk.
His face was white now.
Not pale.
White.
No, he whispered. Not here. The lamps blew out. Every one of them. Darkness flooded the room so fast it felt thrown. I heard the metallic click of his pistol rising. Dante, I said, keeping my voice low. If you shoot at what you hear, You'll hit me first. Answer me, he said immediately.
His breathing had changed. Faster.
Where are you? By the chair. Are you alone? The question froze me. My eyes adjusted by degrees. The window was now the blackest thing in the room, except there was something blacker standing in front of it. A shape. Human.
Tall.
Hair hanging down. I could only see its outline where the rain on the glass gave it a border. Then lightning flashed outside and lit the room in a single white wound. In that instant, I saw Dante standing with a gun half raised, and directly behind him, so close her mouth was nearly at his ear, stood a woman in a soaked white dress. Her face was bruised around the throat. One eye was dark with drowned shadow. And she was smiling. The lightning died. So did the image. But Dante shuddered as if he had heard her breathe. She's here, he whispered. She's on my left. My phone buzzed in my pocket. With shaking fingers, I pulled it out. Another message. Same blank number. Tell him not to answer when I use his mother's voice. Before I could speak, a woman began to hum from the hallway. A lullaby.
Thin.
Tender. Familiar in the worst possible way. Dante made a sound that wasn't a curse or a word. It was the sound of a wound reopening. Then, in the exact voice of a loving mother calling a child in from the dark, something outside the door whispered, Dante, open the door. I've been waiting for you. There are moments when fear stops being a feeling and becomes weather. That room changed weather in seconds. I could taste metal. I could smell river water. Dante stood frozen with a gun raised halfway, and outside the door his dead mother's voice, or something wearing it, went on calling his name with unbearable tenderness. Dante, it whispered. You know I never liked closed doors. He took one step toward it before I grabbed his wrist. His skin was cold. That's not her, I said. He shut his eyes hard enough that the muscles in his face trembled. I know. But his voice sounded 12 years old. The lullaby in the hallway stopped. For one suspended second, the whole house held still. Then something scraped across the ceiling. Long, deliberate. As if nails were being dragged from one end of the room to the other. Dante jerked his head upward. I did too. Another scrape. Then a muffled thud directly above us, though there was no fourth floor. The bedroom door handle twisted once.
Slowly.
It didn't open. Instead, a wet sound slid down the other side of the wood. Not footsteps. Not dripping. It sounded like hair or fabric being pulled downward by gravity. My heart knocked against my ribs, so hard it hurt. If she wants in, I said, she needs permission. Don't say anything. Dante nodded. The handle stopped moving. Then, from underneath the bed, a woman began to laugh.
Close.
Very close. A different laugh than before. Not teasing now.
Pleased.
The kind of laughter you hear from a person who has already won. I forced myself to crouch slightly, just enough to lower the flashlight beam from my phone toward the floor. Dante hissed my name, but I ignored him. The light slid over the boards, caught the trailing edge of wet hair, and then found a hand.
Pale.
Female. Resting palm down just inside the dark. There was a ring mark on the fourth finger. A white band where jewelry had once been worn for years. Dante, I said very softly. Who is she? He didn't answer. The laugh beneath the bed stopped. Silence. Then the hand twitched. The fingers curled inward as if beckoning. That did it. Dante backed away, hitting the wall hard enough to rattle the crucifix above the headboard. Her name was Isabella Vitali, he said, each word sounding dragged over glass. She was my father's fiancée. Lightning flashed again. The hand vanished. In the same instant, the woman appeared not under the bed, not at the window, but reflected in the dark screen of the turned-off television on the wall. She stood behind Dante, throat bruised, white dress clinging to her body, hair hanging in black ropes. Her lips moved. This time I heard it. You owe me a life. Dante spun around and fired. The shot exploded through the room. Glass shattered. A lamp broke. The smell of gunpowder punched through the floral rot. When the echo died, the television screen was cracked. The reflection was gone. But from a hallway came a scream. one of the guards. Then another. We ran out into the corridor and found one of Dante's men on his knees, clutching his head with both hands. "She showed me my wife," he sobbed. "My dead wife. She told me to follow her downstairs." The other guard was gone. We found his pistol near the stairwell, slick with condensation, as though it had been stored in a freezer. On the wallpaper beside it, words were appearing in wet strokes, letter by letter, as if written by an invisible fingertip. "Return the ring." Dante stared at the message with the stillness of a man approaching the edge of memory. "What ring?" I asked. He said nothing. From the far end of the corridor, beyond the dark arch leading to the west wing, came the sound of heels on wood again.
Slow.
Elegant. Closer. The remaining guard ran. I didn't blame him. A shape emerged from the darkness at the end of the hall.
Tall.
White dress. Water dripping from the hem. Her neck carried the faint purple shape of fingers. On her left hand, the ring finger was naked and startlingly pale. She stopped beneath the portrait lights and lifted her face toward Dante. "You put it on me," she said. Her mouth barely moved, but the words filled the corridor. "Before he threw me into the water." Dante made a broken sound in the back of his throat. "I was a child." "Yes," she whispered. "And children remember what cowards bury." Every door along the corridor swung open at once. Not violently.
Smoothly.
As though 100 invisible guests had all decided to come out and listen. We did not sleep. Dawn came gray and sickly, seeping through the estate windows like light that had passed through dirty water. Dante took me to his library because it was the only room in the house with no family portraits and no view of the garden. He poured coffee, but didn't drink his. His hands were too steady for a frightened man and not steady enough for an innocent one. "Tell me everything," I said. He stared at the steam rising from the cup for so long I wondered if he could see shapes in it. Then he began. "When my father brought Isabella into the family," he said, "everyone pretended she was a trophy. Beautiful, quiet, good for his image. But she was not quiet. Not really. She saw too much." He swallowed once. "She was kind to me, kinder than my parents. She gave me a music box shaped like an angel and told me if I ever got scared, I should wind it and listen until the room felt smaller." He actually smiled then, but it was a ruined expression. "I think she knew I was afraid of my father." "And your father?" I asked. Dante's face hardened. "My father loved ownership, more than love. He liked women the way men like expensive paintings.
Framed.
Controlled. Silent." The library clock ticked once, twice, each second sounding too loud. "A few months before the wedding, I heard them fighting," he said. "She told him she wanted to leave. She said she was pregnant." My chest tightened. He accused her of sleeping with someone else. She said the baby was his. He didn't believe her. Or maybe he did and hated what it meant. Vulnerability. Inheritance. A person who might love her more than he controlled her. Dante rubbed a hand over his mouth. The day before she vanished, he made a show of family loyalty. He handed me the Moretti heirloom ring and told me to place it on her finger in front of the staff. A gesture. A symbol. I was a child. I did it. He looked up at me then, and I saw the full shape of the guilt he had been carrying. When I slid it onto her hand, she leaned down and whispered, "If I disappear, don't believe your father." Silence pressed in after that. "The next day?" I asked. Dante nodded once. He took her to the lake house. I followed without him knowing. I saw them on the dock. She was crying. He demanded the ring back. He demanded she admit the child wasn't his. She refused. He put his hands around her throat. Not long. Just enough. His voice turned to stone. Then he pushed her into the water. The words landed in the room like bodies. "And you told no one." I was 11. It was not an excuse. It was a sentence. I thought if I said it out loud, he would kill me too. Then my mother died 3 days later, and I started seeing Isabella everywhere. I told myself I was being punished by something supernatural because it was easier than admitting I had become part of the silence. Before I could answer, the old house steward appeared at the library door, pale and sweating. He held a small wooden box, warped with age. "We found this in the lower storage room, sir," he said. Dante opened it. Inside lay the angel music box, a yellowed handkerchief embroidered with the name Isabella, and a folded note. The box smelled faintly of lake water, although the wood was dry. Dante opened the note with careful fingers. The handwriting was elegant but hurried. "If Dante grows up and still has a conscience, he will come looking for the truth. If he never comes, the Moretti blood has devoured him." I had just enough time to read it once before the music box wound itself and began to play. The melody was the same lullaby we had heard in the hallway. The steward dropped the box and fled. I turned toward the glass doors of the bookcase and froze. In the dark reflection stood Isabella again, one hand resting on Dante's shoulder. But her face had changed. Less rage, more urgency. Her lips formed 4 clear words. "Go to the lake. Today." Dante saw them too. I knew he did because he closed the box, stood up, and said in a voice that sounded nothing like fear, "We end this before nightfall." The lake house stood north of the city, behind a line of black pines that looked charred even in daylight. Dante drove himself. No driver. No music. Just the engine and the weather, both of them increasingly hostile. He had 4 men follow in a second car, but he told them to stay back unless he called. "If this is only a haunting," he said as the road narrowed through the trees, "too many witnesses will feed it." "And if it isn't only a haunting?" I asked. He gripped the wheel tighter. "Then too many witnesses will die." The house appeared beside the lake like a bad memory refusing to rot. Stone walls, dark shutters, long veranda facing still water. Nothing moved.
No birds. No insects.
No wind. The lake itself looked metallic, a sheet of dull gray hammered flat under the clouds. We stepped out, and I smelled lilies before my shoes touched the gravel. Dante didn't react. Either he didn't smell them anymore, or he had lived with them too long. He led me straight through the house to the back dock. It was old but standing, warped by years of weather.
"Here," he said.
I was behind that tree. I saw him do it from there. He pointed to a twisted cypress near the shore. His voice didn't shake now. That frightened me more than panic. One of the guards shouted from the side yard. He and another man had found a cellar room beneath the house, locked from the outside. Before Dante could answer, the lake made a sound. A low, heavy bump under the dock, as if something large had struck it from below. Every head turned. The water had begun to boil in a line along the edge of the planks. Not bubble.
Boil.
A guard drew his weapon. "Back up," Dante ordered. Too late. A pale hand burst from the water and seized the guard's ankle. He screamed and fired downward, but the hand only tightened. It wasn't fully human. Too long.
Too thin.
The skin looked soaked past death. Dante dropped his own gun and lunged, grabbing the man under the arms while I grabbed his belt. We hauled backward against something impossibly strong beneath the surface. The dock groaned. Nails screamed. The guard's boot came off in the thing's grip, then the hand vanished below with it, leaving claw-like marks in the leather. When we dragged the man upright, he vomited lake water onto the boards, though he had never gone under. "She spoke in my head," he gasped. "She said, 'Give back my child.'" The words hit me like cold iron. Isabella had not only died, she had died pregnant. Dante heard it too. I saw the knowledge move through him like a blade. We followed the guards into the cellar. The locked room they had found smelled of mildew, mold, and old violence. Portraits lined the wall, slashed through the faces of women. Jewelry lay boxed on shelves. Hair ribbons.
Gloves.
Tiny objects taken from lives and hidden like trophies. In the middle sat a metal chest. Dante opened it. Inside, wrapped in black velvet gone stiff with age, was the Moretti heirloom ring. Beneath it lay a small cloth bundle. I knew what it was before he unwrapped it. Tiny bones.
Curved.
Delicate. Not enough to be a child, and too much to be mistaken for anything else. Dante went very still. The room around us changed. The air tightened. Every bulb in the cellar burst at once, showering us in hot glass. Darkness swallowed the room. From the top of the stairs came the sound of heels descending.
Slow.
Careful. A woman's voice floated down with it, low and almost kind. Now you remember everything, she said. Good. It's time for you to meet your father where he really lives. Then all the doors in the house slammed shut above us in a single thunderous sequence, one after another, until the entire building sounded like a coffin being nailed closed. Night fell before we reached the dock again. Not natural night. The kind that seems to rise from the ground instead of descending from the sky. The guards wanted to leave. One was shaking too badly to stand. Dante told them to go if they had to. None of them moved. Fear had turned loyalty into paralysis. He stood at the edge of the water with the heirloom ring in one hand and the small cloth bundle in the other. I stayed beside him because by then the story had crossed whatever line separates witness from participant. The lake was black. Not dark. Black. It reflected nothing. Dante inhaled once and called into it. Isabella Vitali. His voice carried strangely, as though the water were swallowing some part of it. I remember.
Now.
The lake answered with widening circles that spread from the center to the shore.
No es plus.
No fish. Just rings moving outward through stillness. The air dropped 10 degrees. One of the men behind us whimpered. Dante went on. My father killed you. He strangled you. He threw you into the lake. He took back the ring and buried the truth.
I saw it.
I said nothing. Wind moved over the water then, but only over the water. It did not touch my hair or his coat. It only crossed the surface in a dark shimmer. I was a child, he said, his voice cracking. But I became a coward because I stayed silent. The circle stopped. Then the middle of the lake lifted. Not a figure rising, at first. Just water gathering itself into the rough shape of a woman. Then she stepped out of it. Isabella. White dress hanging from her body. Hair streaming wet to her waist. Throat bruised. Eyes deep and wrong, and full of unbearable sorrow. She stopped at the edge of the dock, without climbing onto it. You were afraid of me, she said. Her voice came from every direction at once. For 19 years. I was afraid of what I let happen, Dante answered. Not of you. That mattered. I saw it matter. Something in her face shifted, not gentler, but less sharpened. Then give back what was mine. Dante opened his hand and held out the ring. I stepped forward and lifted the cloth bundle with both hands. And my child, Isabella said. The moment I raised it, a sound drifted over the lake.
Not wind.
Not bird. A thin infant cry, so faint it might have been imagined if it had not made every guard behind us stumble backward in horror. Dante sank to one knee on the wet dock boards. I cannot give you your life back, he said. But I can give you your name, your truth, your grave. And I can tear down everything built on your silence. Isabella looked at him for a very long time. The water around her ankles began to fill with shapes. Pale hands. Half-formed faces. Bodies pushing up from the lake bottom only to dissolve again. Witnesses. Or memory. If you want me, Dante said quietly, I won't run. No, Isabella said. And for the first time, her voice sounded almost human. Tired. Death is easy. Memory is the punishment. She extended her hand, not to Dante, but to me. In her palm lay a small brass key, ice cold, what as though lifted from the deepest part of the lake. The attic, she said. He kept his sins above the house, so he could sleep beneath them. I took the key. The moment my skin touched the metal, every light in the lake house flared on at once. Upstairs, windows blazed. Then each bulb burst in a sequence of white explosions. Isabella's form began to sink back into the black water, her eyes never leaving Dante's face. Let me be buried, she whispered. Then learn to live without fear. And she was gone. The lake flattened. The infant cry stopped. Behind us, from somewhere inside the house, an old tape recorder clicked on by itself. The attic door opened on the first turn of the key, as if it had been waiting for us all these years. The air behind it smelled of paper rot, candle wax, and old secrets locked too long in wood. Dante went in first with a flashlight. I followed, the beam slicing through dust thick enough to seem alive. The attic was lined with trunks, ledgers, covered paintings, and shelves of boxes catalogued in his father's neat handwriting. At the center sat a leather armchair facing away from the door. Draped over it was a suit jacket, one of the old man's. For a second, in that weak cone of light, it looked like a body sitting there and listening. Dante tore it off and found a tape recorder, a revolver gone rusty, and a black notebook beneath it. The tape was already loaded. He pressed play. Static hissed. Then his father's voice came through, dry and amused, like a man dictating a recipe rather than a confession. He admitted everything. Isabella had not betrayed him. The child was his. But she had threatened to leave and expose business connections, offshore accounts, politicians on his payroll. A woman with a conscience is more dangerous than a rival with a gun, the voice said. So, I solved the problem. My stomach turned. Dante stood motionless, but his shadow on the wall shook. The tape went on. The old man said he kept the ring because power liked symbols, and he kept the child's remains because fear worked best when it had relics. He even spoke of Dante. The boy saw enough, he said with a chuckle. Fear made him obedient. If he ever listens to this, then either he has become me, or the dead woman refused to stay drowned. Something changed in the room then. The flashlight dimmed. Every cupboard, painting along the walls, began to tremble. The notebook in Dante's hand opened by itself, pages riffling backward until they stopped on a sketch of Isabella in a white dress, one hand over her stomach, the other wearing the Moretti ring. Across the page, in a handwriting not the father's, appeared fresh, wet words. Remember me alive. Dante dropped to his knees. Not from fear. From grief. I'm sorry, he said into the stale dark. I'm sorry I let him turn you into a ghost before I remembered you were a woman. The room fell still. Then Isabella stepped out from behind the chair. No water this time.
No bruises.
No broken throat. She looked almost as she must have before she died. Beautiful. Exhausted. Young in the face. Ancient in the eyes. She stood before Dante and looked down at him not like a predator or a judge, but like someone finally being seen after years of pressing her hands against the glass. I stayed, she said, because no one said I had lived. Dante lifted his face. His eyes were red, but steady. I'll say it now. And he did. He spoke her name. He spoke her child's existence. He spoke the murder aloud. He promised exhumation, burial, public confession, the destruction of every hidden ledger his father built on her grave. When he finished, Isabella closed her eyes. The air in the attic warmed by a single degree. Not much, but enough. Enough that the smell of lilies faded. Enough that the house no longer sounded like it was holding its breath. She looked at me then, and for the first time I saw gratitude in something dead. Then she turned back to Dante, touched 2 fingers to his forehead, and whispered, Now sleep. Her form loosened into pale light.
No scream.
No violence.
No storm.
Just a soft unraveling, like mist lifting off a lake at dawn. She was gone. By morning, the police had the tape, the ledgers, and the room beneath the dock excavated. Isabella Vitali and the remains of her unborn child were finally recovered from the silt. Dante stood before cameras that afternoon and confessed what his family had hidden for 19 years. The city called it scandal. Men on television called it strategy. But I knew better. It was an exorcism done in daylight. 3 nights later, I returned to the estate because Dante had asked me to see something. I found him standing in his bedroom, with every lamp turned off. No gun beneath the pillow. No rosary clenched in his fist. Just darkness. Real darkness. Peaceful darkness. He looked over when I entered. Do you hear anything? I asked. He listened. The room held only our breathing. Then he gave me the smallest, tiredest smile I had ever seen.
No, he said.
For the first time in 20 years, the dark doesn't know my name. And I understood then that the most frightening part of his story had never been the ghost. It had been the silence that made one.